I didn't report it right away. That's always the first thing they ask, isn't it? Why didn't you speak up sooner? But timing is a luxury afforded to people who don't have to weigh every move against their mortgage payment, their reputation, or their visa status. I waited, observed, wrote things down. And then, after the third comment in as many weeks, I filed the complaint. It was a Tuesday, late February. The kind of Bay Area morning where the fog wraps around buildings like it's reluctant to let them go. I remember because I sat in my car an extra 5 minutes, watching it roll across the top of the parking garage. My thumb hovered over the screen of my phone, rereading the email one more time before hitting send. Formal report of inappropriate conduct, Caleb Horn. Subject line clean. No drama. No exclamation marks. Just the truth, the facts, and attached timestamps. I'd edited it 12 times. My complaint wasn't emotional, it was procedural. I knew HR would be watching for hysteria. I gave them none. The first time Caleb said something, it was at the quarterly meeting, in front of half the energy analytics team. He leaned in during a group photo and whispered that I smelled like trouble. Everyone laughed, myself included, because it was easier than freezing the air. But I wrote it down that night. The second time was in the kitchen. I was making tea, and he stood too close. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him along my back. "You always so precise, or just when I'm watching?" he asked. That time, I didn't laugh. I looked at him until he stepped back. And I wrote that down too. The third was in a Slack thread about a project he hadn't even been assigned to. "Let's put Aparna on it," he wrote. "She's good with details, and she looks better than spreadsheets." I reacted with a neutral face emoji. Classic corporate deflection. Then I started the email. By Thursday, I had a confirmation. "We've received your complaint and will begin a preliminary review." No signature. Just HR operations. I didn't expect fireworks. I didn't even expect discipline. But I expected something more than silence. Weeks passed. No one called me in. No follow-up questions. No indication that anything was being taken seriously. Caleb kept walking the halls like he owned them. Every time I passed his office, I felt like a ghost, present but unacknowledged. Then came the project shuffle. It wasn't obvious at first. A dashboard review reassigned to someone else. A client call I was supposed to lead, suddenly rescheduled, without me. When I checked the team's shared folders, my access had quietly been downgraded. It was subtle, precise, like someone knew exactly how to undercut me without drawing blood. I sent a second email to HR, following up on the status of my complaint. I'm beginning to observe what feels like retaliation. No reply. Instead, I got a calendar invite. Quick touch base, Lila Ray, HR, 30 minutes, no agenda. I knew the drill. Lila smiled the whole time, like we were old friends catching up over lattes. "Thanks so much for bringing this to our attention," she said. "Just wanted to let you know it's still under review. These things take time, you understand." I asked if Caleb had been spoken to. Her smile tightened. "I can't discuss details related to other employees." I asked if there was a timeline. She shrugged. "Soon." When I stood to leave, she added, "And Aparna, you're doing great work. Try not to let this distract you too much." Like I was the one causing trouble. Like professionalism meant staying silent while being chipped away. In the elevator back down, I stared at the brushed metal doors and counted my breath. I had done everything right. Documented everything. Followed the protocol. Filed the complaint through official channels. And in return, I got a warning wrapped in sweetness and a calendar full of disappearing responsibilities. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched the city lights flicker through my blinds and thought about every other woman or man who had probably walked this exact hallway, who'd been told, "We're looking into it," and then slowly erased from relevance. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I started collecting. Not gossip. Not rumor. Just process. The policies, the procedures, the timelines, the logs. I reread the employee handbook, the whistleblower policy, the anti-retaliation clause. I cross-referenced them against internal communications. I wasn't looking to destroy anyone. I was building a map. Because somewhere in this building, behind the polished concrete floors and kombucha taps and branded tote bags, was a crack. A procedural failure. An inconsistency big enough to step through if I was quiet enough, patient enough. And if I found it, I wasn't going to knock on anyone's door. I was going to open it. The waiting was its own kind of erosion. Not sharp, not loud, just a quiet drip, one drop at a time, until you start to feel hollow in places you never thought could go numb. It had been 3 weeks since my meeting with Lila. No emails. No follow-ups. I started to feel like a sticky note someone had meant to come back to, now curling at the edges, half forgotten on the corner of a cluttered desk. At work, things moved around me, but never with me. A budget meeting I normally led was reassigned to a junior associate who kept mispronouncing client names. Our operations lead forgot to invite me to a forecasting call, then sent a sheepish "oops, missed you" message afterward, as if it had been an oversight. I knew better. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being ghosted. Strategically. There's a particular chill to institutional silence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't accuse. It just pulls away gently, like a tide receding, leaving you ankle-deep and stranded. I began noticing how Caleb moved differently now. More confident, somehow, like the absence of consequences had given him permission to relax. His jokes were louder. His proximity closer. He started dropping in on meetings he had no stake in, lingering behind my chair just long enough to remind me he could. One afternoon, I caught him looking at me across the break room. He raised his mug in a mock salute. Still keeping everyone honest, he asked, loud enough that a couple of our colleagues chuckled awkwardly. I didn't answer. I just rinsed my cup and walked out, my face carefully neutral. But something inside me shifted that day. Not fear, clarity. They weren't going to fix this. Not HR. Not leadership. Not anyone who signed off on values posters, but flinched at the word liability. Still, I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. Retaliation is hard to prove, especially when it's dressed in plausible deniability. I needed something more, something institutional. So I waited. Observed. Took notes. At home, I opened a private folder on my personal laptop, timeline.xlsx. Not poetic, but precise. I logged every change to my access permissions, every meeting removed from my calendar, every time someone emailed Caleb with praise and CC'd leadership. I wasn't trying to be petty, I was collecting data. Patterns. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record-keeping. Then, just as I began to settle into the silence, a ping, Aparna, would you be available to assist on the Q2 cross-departmental compliance prep? The sender was Nadia Liu, Director of Legal Affairs. I read the message twice. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't even a compliment. But it was neutral territory. Compliance reviews sat outside HR's chain of influence. It was work I'd done before, methodical and dry, the kind of thing most people avoid because it requires reading every line of policy manuals and audit trails. I responded yes immediately. The retaliation didn't stop, but it softened. Perhaps HR thought I'd gotten the message. Maybe they assumed I was moving on. I didn't correct them. I kept showing up, kept documenting, kept quiet. One morning, Lila cornered me near the espresso machine. Just wanted to say, "You've handled everything with such professionalism," she said, eyes scanning the room. Some people make these things messier than they need to be. I didn't take the bait. "I'm just following the process," I replied, and I watched something flicker behind her smile. Annoyance, maybe. Or disappointment that I hadn't cracked. In truth, I had cracked. Just not in the way she thought. It's a strange thing, being ignored by the very system that promises to protect you. You start questioning your own memory. Did I imagine the way Caleb stood too close? Did I misinterpret the Slack message? Was I just too sensitive, too formal, too me? But I kept going back to the facts. The policies. The training modules we were all forced to complete each year. HR loved those mandatory sessions on workplace respect, diversity, reporting protocols. It all sounded so good in theory. In practice, I was walking through a house built without walls. Every door I knocked on led to another blank hallway. But even houses without walls have foundations. And I was starting to understand how this one was wired. A week into the compliance review, I was given temporary access to interdepartmental audit files. Nothing secret, just routine logs, who approved what, how long tasks lingered in limbo, which emails referenced which policy revisions. It was data. Pure and simple. But data, in the right hands, tells a story. I started noticing inconsistencies. HR responding to other complaints within a week. Even minor ones, team conflict, interpersonal miscommunications, were logged, tagged, resolved. Mine? Under review. No timeline. No updates. Worse still, I found an internal thread, not about me, not directly. But it referenced sensitive reporting, cases, and how certain employees might need to be deprioritized during the upcoming resourcing cycle. No names. No smoking gun. But it aligned too neatly with the timing of my project exclusions. I printed nothing. Downloaded nothing. But I noted metadata. Dates. Phrasing. Anything that could be cross-referenced later. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was architecture. And I was learning where the beams were. By the end of the second month, I had stopped hoping for HR to act. I didn't need them to anymore. My fear had calcified into purpose. I wasn't just documenting retaliation. I was watching a machine malfunction in slow motion and preparing to show someone who mattered how it broke. I just had to be patient. One more step. One more click. One more misstep from the people who thought I was fading. They'd forgotten the quiet ones are usually the ones still listening. It started with a PDF that shouldn't have been there. I was deep into the Q2 compliance audit, an endless parade of access logs, outdated flowcharts, and policy review schedules, when I clicked open a folder labeled HR_review_materials. It was misfiled under legal shared drive, likely during a hasty drag and drop. Not technically confidential, but not meant for my eyes either. Inside was a document titled Q2_status_concerns_internal. I hesitated, then opened it. Most of it was routine HR language, open cases, follow-up delays, and vague performance notes, but halfway down, buried between updates on onboarding delays and an EAP survey, I saw it. Employee complaint. Meta. Status remains low priority pending further instruction. Flagged for watch list due to potential behavioral escalation. My name. Flatly referenced like a spreadsheet cell. No mention of the nature of the complaint. No context. Just watch list, like I was a security risk for filing paperwork. I closed the file, heart pounding, and leaned back in my chair. The office buzzed around me, keyboards clacking, someone unwrapping a granola bar, Caleb's voice trailing from a distant conference room. I felt none of it. Only the thick weight of clarity settling in. This wasn't just delay. It was triage. They had decided actively that I wasn't worth addressing unless I caused a scene. That unless I escalated, I could be safely ignored. That's when I stopped being afraid of breaking rules. Because they already thought I might. Over the next few days, I combed through archived review documents with a different eye. Not as a compliance analyst, but as a participant in the story they were trying to redact. I found an email chain from last quarter between Lila and one of the department leads. Subject: persistent noise around complaint follow-up. Caleb's name wasn't mentioned, but the tone was unmistakable. Lila referred to oversensitivity and certain staff misunderstanding cultural cues. She wrote, "We may need to consider end-of-cycle reshuffling if the issue doesn't resolve quietly." Resolve quietly. I kept reading. In another message, a junior HR rep asked if there had been a response to my second follow-up. Lila's reply was curt, "No response necessary yet. Let it settle. Let it settle." That was the strategy. Wait me out. Tangle me in ambiguity until I either gave up or gave them a reason to discredit me. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not even vindication. I just wanted acknowledgement. Something real. Something that said, "We saw this, and it mattered." But every file I opened made it clearer. What mattered wasn't the complaint itself. What mattered was whether I became a liability. That's when the idea began forming. Not all at once, but in increments. I wasn't going to leak anything. That would make me the problem. But if someone with real authority, someone like Nadia, happened to see something troubling during a legitimate workflow, that would be process. That would be protocol. That would be their own system turning inward. I took notes. Not the kind you delete. I used a hardbound notebook from a conference 2 years ago, one I kept in my bag and never connected to anything digital. I wrote down file names, timestamps, sender initials. I logged each moment where process failed, where the architecture looked fine on the surface, but was visibly cracking underneath. Meanwhile, Caleb continued being Caleb. Loud, charming, careless. He joked more openly now, especially when others were around. Once, during a compliance can day, he interrupted to ask if my hawk-eyed detail sniffed out any crimes yet. No one laughed. Not really. But no one intervened either. The silence wasn't passive. It was consent. But I didn't react. I stayed neutral. Polished. Impeccable. I filed my audits early, checked and rechecked citations, ran 3 levels of cross-validation on a supply chain mapping document no one would probably read twice. And in between all that, I read more. There was one last email that changed everything. It was a forward. A mistake, maybe. Or just laziness. A junior HR assistant had responded to a legal inquiry and included previous threads, ones that should have been trimmed. Buried in the trail was a comment from Lila. She's still documenting everything, from what I hear. Trying to build a pattern. Classic move, if we just stay still, she'll burn out. I read that sentence 4 times. That was the moment I stopped waiting for justice and started building the mechanism for it. They knew I was documenting. They expected me to give up. What they didn't expect was that I'd stop trying to be heard and start letting them speak for themselves. Because everything I needed to expose was already in their words. All I had to do was find the right window to hold them up to the light. The thing about having leverage is you have to decide whether you're willing to use it. And that's not as simple as it sounds, not when the consequences might outlast the win. For days, I debated the same question every night as I lay staring at the ceiling, fingers laced over my stomach, listening to the soft hum of the fridge down the hall. What did I want? An apology? Accountability? A scorched earth exit? Or just to be believed? A friend of mine, Marissa, a journalist who now freelances for digital investigative outlets, called me one evening after I let something slip about my situation. You know, she said, voice low, if you leak even a sentence of those emails, I could get you a byline in 3 hours. Anonymous, protected, clean. I didn't hesitate. No, she sighed. Why? You're sitting on something real. Something systemic. I don't want noise, I said. I want pressure. Quiet, lawful, undeniable pressure. And that was the truth. I didn't want to become a story. I wanted to become a variable the system could no longer ignore. So I pulled up my employment contract again. I'd read it more times than I could count by now, but this time I was reading between the lines, searching for the quiet immunities buried in legalese. Clause 6.2, Protection from Retaliation. Clause 7.4, Procedural Obligations around Harassment Complaints. Clause 11.1, Compliance Reporting Exemptions. There it was again, exemptions, the small door I could slip through without triggering alarms. I mapped it out like a chessboard. If I acted emotionally, I'd be tagged unstable. If I went public, they'd shift the narrative. If I framed it as an internal concern, compliance language, nothing personal, then I could move without raising defenses. They'd have to treat it like any other procedural irregularity. That was my edge. Not moral outrage. Not threats. Process. Procedure. Paper. It wasn't the satisfying route. There were days when I wanted to slam my laptop shut and write the whole damn story in a Twitter thread, let the fury of the internet do what HR refused to. But fury fades. Evidence lingers. I kept the notebook close. Made extra copies of key excerpts. Each note was a breadcrumb. I wasn't even sure yet where they led, only that I had to follow them slowly, deliberately, like walking through a minefield. When I passed Caleb in the hallway now, he barely looked at me. Whether it was confidence or boredom, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. The company hadn't slowed him down at all. If anything, he seemed more visible, taking calls in glass-walled conference rooms, laughing a little too loud. I sometimes wondered if he even remembered the complaint. HR certainly hadn't. Lila was busy preparing for mid-year reviews now. I saw her calendar one day on a shared view, every 30 minutes accounted for, every meeting slotted like a puzzle piece. Efficient. Controlled. Predictable. That, too, was leverage. They all thought the story was cooling down. But I knew better. Stories don't cool. They ferment. What I was sitting on wasn't just a list of emails. It was an architecture of failure, timelines, language, decisions. And soon, someone else would see it. Someone with real power. Someone outside the echo chamber. I wasn't planning to blow anything up. I was planning to hand them the match. It had to look unintentional. A genuine oversight, plausible and unremarkable. The kind of thing that happens when you're juggling too many tabs and replying too quickly. Nothing vengeful. Nothing overt. Just a mistake. I spent the better part of a week preparing the compliance packet for Nadia Liu. As Director of Legal Affairs, she reviewed high-level procedural audits once per quarter. My assignment was to prepare the draft narrative and attach all supporting documentation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the closest thing to a pressure valve I had found inside the company. Legal wasn't beholden to HR. They answered to different metrics, different risks. Risk, I knew, they took seriously. The report itself was straightforward, a series of policy adherence reviews, a few flagged inconsistencies in onboarding wait times, and one minor exception in the vendor background check process. Nothing controversial. But buried inside the shared folder I'd assembled, under a perfectly innocuous label, policy_conflict_notes_rev2, was a PDF. The file was genuine. It had come from HR. It was one of the threads I'd found earlier, where Lila had written, "She's still documenting everything, from what I hear. Classic move, if we just stay still, she'll burn out." I didn't edit it. I didn't forge anything. I didn't even draw attention to it. I simply attached it. I included a brief note, "See attached for minor discrepancies in interdepartmental handoffs, possible procedural crossovers worth flagging." That was it. Then I hit send. I sat there for a while afterward, watching the sent confirmation bounce back into my inbox. My hands were still on the keys, fingers slightly curled, like I was expecting a shock. But there was nothing. Just the quiet click of the office HVAC system and the distant rustle of someone typing too hard across the room. The brilliance of bureaucracy is that no one looks too closely until they have to. That's what I was counting on, that Nadia, methodical and brilliant in her own right, would read what she was supposed to read, and then keep reading. It wasn't long. The next morning, a calendar invite arrived. Quick sync, compliance follow-up. Sender, Nadia Liu. It was set for 11:15 a.m. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then accepted. No reply. No note. Just the event. When I joined the call, she was already there, camera on, legal pad beside her. "Aparna," she said, skipping pleasantries, "can you walk me through the origin of the policy conflict notes attachment?" I kept my tone neutral. That file came up during the cross-department audit. I was compiling historical handoffs from Q1 into Q2. The note thread seemed to involve procedural overlap, so I flagged it. She nodded. "Were you aware of the language inside it?" I paused, just long enough to register without appearing rehearsed. "Yes." That's why I flagged it. Nadia didn't smile. But something shifted behind her eyes. She clicked her pen, made a note, then said, "You've done nothing wrong by forwarding it. It's technically within audit scope. But I need you to be aware that it's going to initiate some internal inquiries." I nodded. Understood. We ended the call 7 minutes later. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Nervous, even. Like I had just set something in motion that couldn't be undone, but wouldn't make a sound until it was already moving beneath the surface. For the rest of the day, everything looked the same: emails, meetings, polite chatter. But I noticed Caleb cancel his 3 p.m. status update. Lila walked by my desk twice without making eye contact. And just after 5 p.m., a company-wide reminder of workplace conduct and reporting channels email went out. The kind they usually send after someone gets fired. It wasn't fire. Not yet. But something was smoking. I went home, made tea, and watched the light fade across my balcony. I thought about all the ways this could still turn sideways. About plausible deniability. About power. But then I remembered Lila's words, "If we just stay still, she'll burn out." I hadn't burned out. I'd waited. I'd watched. And meeting with me short, just 15 minutes. This time, she opened with a question I didn't expect. "Have you been contacted by anyone regarding the review?" I shook my head. No. Good, she said. We'd like to keep it that way for now. There was a pause. Then, softer, you handled this with restraint, Aparna. I want you to know that didn't go unnoticed. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't looking for praise. But hearing it from her settled something tight in my chest. After the call, I sat at my desk for a while, looking out the window at the rooftop of the adjacent building. Fog was rolling in again, slow and deliberate. Nothing sudden. Nothing dramatic. Just the quiet shift of weather over glass. Later that day, a few colleagues whispered about an HR shuffle and some external consultants arriving the following week. A restructure, maybe? Or an audit. No one used words like harassment or failure. But the vocabulary didn't matter. I recognized the cadence of containment. They weren't fixing the problem because they believed in justice. They were fixing it because now there was risk. Exposure. And in the calculus of corporate self-preservation, risk always gets attention before truth does. Still, there was something deeply satisfying in the way it unfolded, not with explosions, but with paper. The emails, the memos, the calendar gaps. It was a system unraveling itself, line by line, under the weight of its own negligence. People began treating me differently, too, not dramatically, just carefully. Eye contact lasted a beat longer. Voices softened around me. I wasn't dangerous, exactly, but I wasn't invisible anymore either. At lunch, one of the younger analysts I used to mentor sat beside me in the break room and murmured, "I heard what's going on. Don't know details, but whatever you did, I'm glad you're still here." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. The point wasn't recognition. It was that she could say those words at all. I walked back to my desk that afternoon through a hallway that had once felt cold and indifferent. It didn't feel warm now, but it felt changed. Like something unspoken had shifted, just slightly, in the current. Caleb wouldn't be back. HR wouldn't look the same. And I would keep moving. Now, I'd moved. It didn't unravel all at once. Systems like this rarely do. They come apart in fragments, first the language shifts, then the faces. By the start of the next quarter, Lila's name was gone from the company directory. No announcement, no farewell email. Just an empty LinkedIn update weeks later that said she was exploring new opportunities. I didn't ask anyone where she went. I already knew, away from accountability, toward somewhere her record wouldn't follow. In her place, a temporary HR liaison arrived, someone from a third-party firm with a stiff smile and clipped vowels. She sat in on meetings, but said very little, taking notes like she was building a case for a client she didn't name. Meanwhile, legal circulated a revised Conduct and Reporting Protocols handbook, this time with a dedicated appendix for complaint escalation timelines. It read like any other compliance document, dry, precise, bullet-pointed, but I recognized several phrases I'd written in my notes months ago. Pattern of delay, retaliatory perception risk, evidence of procedural hesitation. Someone had read my trail. They didn't say it outright, but the subtext was clear. We saw what happened, and we're making it harder to happen again. Caleb's official departure came dressed in euphemism. An email from leadership thanked him for his contributions to cross-functional strategy and wished him well in his next chapter. No one replied. Not a single emoji, not even the usual empty clapping hands reactions. That silence said everything. I watched it all unfold from a careful distance. No one came to me with explanations, and I didn't seek them. My role didn't change. My title stayed the same. But small things shifted. I was invited to more meetings again. My project assignments started including real deliverables, not just make work overflow. I was asked for input instead of approval. Not celebrated. Just restored. Which is what I'd wanted all along. Not a spotlight. Just to be seen accurately. The company would survive, of course. They always do. It would rebrand, reframe, release statements about doubling down on culture. The machinery would grind on, shinier and slightly more cautious, at least for a while. But something fundamental had changed, even if no one would put words to it. I passed Nadia in the hallway one afternoon, just as I was leaving for the day. She offered a small nod, not formal, not performative. Just recognition. I returned it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. At my desk, tucked beneath a folder of vendor risk assessments, was the notebook. I hadn't written in it since the audit ended. I opened to the last page. There were no triumphs scribbled there, no victory tally. Just a single line I'd written early on, when the hallway felt narrower and my voice felt smaller. They won't fix what they refuse to see. But eventually, slowly, stubbornly, they had. And they saw it because I didn't scream. I wrote. I documented. I waited. And then I let their own words finish the story. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was earned. No meetings, no applause, no HR banner thanking me for my courage. That's not how it ends for people like me, not in real life. The company moved on. People filled the gaps left by those who'd quietly exited, and departments restructured like nothing had broken. But something had. I wasn't congratulated. I was simply left alone. And in some quiet way, that was the win. A month after Caleb's departure, I was reassigned, not promoted, but shifted. I now sat on a small task force aimed at internal systems resilience. No formal title change, no public recognition. Just a new Slack channel, a modest budget, and an invitation to a monthly roundtable with legal and compliance. My first contribution was a recommendation on improving document trail retention for anonymous complaints. It was accepted without edit. I wasn't trying to be a reformer. I wasn't trying to lead anything. I just wanted to close the gap between what we said we were and what we actually did. Some evenings, I still thought about that first email I sent. How tentative it felt. How careful my language was. The precision I used not to protect myself from retaliation, but from dismissal. The exhausting tightrope of being composed enough to be believed and aggrieved enough to be taken seriously, but not too much of either. It makes you understand why so many people stay silent. But some didn't. A week into my new role, I found a sticky note left on my monitor. Thank you. You made it safer. No name. No flourish. Just handwriting I didn't recognize. I kept it tucked inside my notebook, next to the earliest entries about Caleb and HR's silence. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Because the truth is, I didn't take anyone down. I didn't expose a scandal. I didn't go viral or give a TED Talk. I stayed. I endured. I learned their rules better than they did. And when the time came, I let their own documentation light the fuse. There's something deeply unsettling and strangely beautiful about watching a system correct itself not because it wants to, but because it can no longer afford not to. There's no vindication in that, no cinematic moment. But there is order. There is consequence. And maybe that's the best we get. A few weeks later, I passed a young analyst, new hire, sharp, still wide-eyed, who stopped me in the kitchen and said, "You're Aparna, right? They said you were the person who keeps things clean." I smiled. Clean's a good place to start. She grinned back, and we went back to pouring our tea. That was it. No fireworks. No confrontation. Just the subtle restoration of truth where it had once been neglected. I don't know where Caleb is now. I don't need to. That story is closed. But I think sometimes about people like him, not just the ones who harass, but the ones who manage to stay just inside the boundaries of consequence for so long because the people around them are trained to look away. And I think about the ones like Lila, who keep the machine humming not because they believe in it, but because they don't want to feel the cost of challenging it. What I learned is that you don't have to blow anything up to break it. Sometimes, you just have to pay attention long enough. And then forward the right email.